This week on To the Contrary.
First, women, the key to peace. Then, the role of diplomacy in ending modern slavery. Behind the headlines, political violence against women.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. This week, we've assembled a panel of outstanding female diplomats, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, former Undersecretaries Ellen Tauscher and Paula Dobriansky, and former Assistant Secretary of State Jendayi Frazer. Up first, women and diplomacy.
Do women work differently than men in diplomacy? The myth might be that women are less belligerent than men, but there have been exceptions, such as former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. She launched a war in the Falkland Islands. Some experts say if a woman were Secretary of State or even president right now, we would not have had North Korea issue a declaration of war against the U.S. Former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright has been quoted as saying, "I really think that there was a great advantage in many ways to being a woman. I think we are a lot better at personal relationships and then have the capability, obviously, of telling it like it is when necessary."
So, Madam Secretary, would things be different now if you were still Secretary of State?
Or they'd be different if Hillary Clinton were president. And basically, there's no question that we're in a very, very complicated era, which would have been true no matter what. But I do think that having people that have an experience in foreign policy and understand diplomacy is very important. And I do think that I was the first woman Secretary of State, and people thought a woman couldn't be Secretary of State. And people said, Arabs would not deal with a woman. And what happened, I'd been at the United Nations before, and the Arab ambassadors there got together and put out a statement and said we had no problems dealing with Ambassador Albright. We had more so we wouldn't have problem with a Secretary Albright. Frankly, I had more problems with the men in our own government because they had all known me too long. They had known me as the carpool mother and somebody that had cooked dinner for them and been a staffer. And then they all thought they should be Secretary of State, and how did I get there?
Amazing. And you as Undersecretary of State, was it different? What was your experience in terms of how women do diplomacy differently, if at all?
Yeah, so I came from the Congress, so it was a different set of circumstances for me. I was very lucky to be asked by President Obama and Secretary Clinton to become Undersecretary of State for Arms Control. I left the Congress where I had been chairman of the Armed Services Committee Strategic Forces, so I had experience in doing these things, but it was a whole new world for me to go to the State Department, and I was very lucky. People were very nice to me, even though I wasn't a trained Foreign Service officer. And, the bureau that I had 600 people, 3 assistant secretaries, and a number of frankly, some of the smartest people in the world when it comes to treaty art and nonproliferation and biochemical weapons. And it was really wonderful to work with them. But
that's really male territory that you were in.
It is. It's very white and very male. I think that under my time there and subsequently, we've done our best to try to diversify that area. Clearly, arms control is a big issue. We thought that perhaps we would be in a different world as we turned into the 21st century, but that's clearly not where we are. And we need the best and brightest of America, and that means we need a diverse and smart workforce that understands all of the parts of arms control. And I'm glad to see that we're building that.
Were you able to use your gender to help you in negotiations on arms treaties?
Well, I had spent 17 years on Wall Street and had a reputation for being able to negotiate. I was a moderate in the Congress that had negotiated with both sides of the aisles. And so I wasn't afraid to take on a tough issue and sit down and talk about it. I was glad to have people that could school me in exactly the treaty art, the kabuki dance of actually sitting and negotiating. There's a lot about it that is very intricate. But I think I did try to leverage the fact that I was not from the diplomacy world, but that I had a lot at stake and that I knew a little bit about it. But I was also really, I think, trying to depend on the fact that I had smart people around me.
Now, Undersecretary Dobriansky, did you find you were Undersecretary for 2 terms under George W. Bush? Did you find being a woman to be an advantage or a disadvantage in your negotiations?
Well, I've spent most of my own career in foreign policy, and so I'll say the only difference I saw between the first term and the second term was the fact that we had, of the 6 undersecretaries of state, we had 2 in the first term, and 4 men, and we had 4 undersecretaries who were women in the second term and 2 men. I would just say that there was a real premium placed on diversity. I think both in high-level positions, in all different departments, not just the State Department. A lot of people were brought in, and qualifications were looked at. It wasn't only diversification, but also qualifications. And I don't need to tell the women at this table, there are a lot of women who are very qualified and who competed for positions and ended up in high-level positions in the George W. Bush administration. So it was great. I wouldn't have stayed for 8 years if, A, I wasn't motivated by the policy, but if I also didn't enjoy what I was doing. There was a camaraderie, and I felt a good integration in this regard, whether you had a male diplomat or a female diplomat.
Ambassador Frazer, you were the first female ambassador to South Africa, sent there by President George W. Bush. And you have, you're African American, obviously, and you're a woman. How did that affect your career in diplomacy?
Well, I think that being from what is considered a minority group or an outside group, whether it's based on gender or its race or its religion, gives you a broader perspective. You have to master the dominant culture. And so as a woman diplomat, clearly the dominant culture was male diplomats. And you have to be able to navigate that, fit in well. I think it was very important to have a thick skin. I started my career in government actually at the Pentagon, at the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in a small room full of 5 guys who were very crude, if I have to say it, on a daily basis. Yeah. On a daily basis, they were very crude. And I learned to manage that and to get the work done. And so I think that those early lessons proved very helpful to me as I, rose up in the ranks of the, I'm not a Foreign Service officer either. I'm a political appointee when I was in government. But as I rose up to Assistant Secretary, I had that thick skin. I understood how to be in diverse settings and be comfortable there.
And were you involved in getting her appointed ambassador?
I wish I could say I was, but maybe in a slight way, because undersecretaries are represented on what's called the D committee, and in which selections are made for ambassadorships. But those are predominantly ambassadors who are foreign service officers. But Jendayi was outstanding, not only as ambassador, but she was also outstanding as an assistant secretary. But I was going to point out something that was interesting, and we were discussing earlier, and that is the issue of mentors. All of my mentors during my 25-plus career actually were men, and men who, as diplomats, who really provided guidance, encouragement, support, and really put their actions where their mouths were. And in that sense, I think I benefited greatly from them, from their advice. And I've seen a real change in diplomacy. And I even think the statistics now that more women are actually foreign service officers than men at this time.
Is that going to change things?
I think that women have a role to play, but I also think men do. I think that it depends on the qualifications of the person. Right. There are good diplomats and bad diplomats, and both fit in both categories.
Unfortunately, now we have no diplomats, because in this administration, none of the 6 undersecretaries have been appointed. And, it's
how unusual is that?
It's never happened.
It's never happened
like this. And, those are real deficits. Paula's case in public diplomacy, a key ally to the president, providing the President and the Secretary with very important information. In my case, Undersecretary for Arms Control. It would be nice to know that there was someone with the grounding of that background advising the White House and the President and the Secretary right now on these issues. None of those jobs have been nominated. None of them have been confirmed. That is a major hole in the capabilities of the government, the capabilities of the National Security Council, the State Department, and the President to get the best advice and the best kind of sense for a path forward.
All right. Let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay or at To the Contrary. From diplomatic differences to the fight against human trafficking.
Human trafficking is a form of modern slavery, a multi-billion-dollar criminal industry that denies freedom to more than 20 million people around the globe. According to the United Nations, women and girls are 71% of those trafficked. No matter where you live, chances are it's happening nearby. From the girl forced into prostitution at a truck stop, to the man discovered in a restaurant kitchen, stripped of his passport and held against his will. All trafficking victims share one essential experience: the loss of freedom. The State Department is in charge of the country's international efforts to combat human trafficking and coordinates domestic anti-trafficking as well.
So, Undersecretary Dobriansky, you had a special interest in this issue when you were at the State Department. Well, what did you get done?
Well, in fact, I was Undersecretary for Global Affairs, and in my line, we had to establish the Trafficking in Persons Office. And we came in the George W. Bush administration, came on the heels of legislation. And it's important to point that out, and particularly with the former Congresswoman sitting here, that there was legislation that was advanced. It was the Trafficking Victims and Protection Act. On the House side, Congressman Chris Smith, and on the Senate side, now deceased, but Senator Paul Wellstone. And they really, along with many others, advanced this legislation. It was in the Clinton administration where this legislation was signed and enacted. But it was then the transition where, when I was at the State Department, we had to create the office. We had to take the steps. It was very groundbreaking. So some of the things that were achieved, one was the fact that this office was created. We agreed that it would report directly to the Undersecretary of State, rather than to a bureau, to give it a high-level attention and prominence. And we had to issue the annual report. And the first several years, there weren't sanctions attached to those countries that appeared on the highest tier. There was Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 3 being the most difficult.
Where do we rank?
Well, you know, the State Department does not officially rank the United States. We always look outward. So we never officially ranked the United States during my years. It's outward looking. But let me tell you that during that period, we had the 3 tiers. We looked at the protection of victims, the prevention of trafficking, and the prosecution of those criminals. I want to mention, though, 2 groundbreaking things that did occur during my time. With that legislation, we were required to hold cabinet-level meetings, and that was phenomenal. Each Secretary of State did that, brought in all the cabinet members. So every single cabinet member, the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of HHS, the head of CIA, all of them came to talk about how do we pull together to combat it.
But it seems like...
But I tell you, I think what's interesting is it was not viewed as an issue for a long time.
That's right.
And when we were in office, all of a sudden it became very clear that this criminal activity was going on. And so it was really, we began it in the Clinton administration in terms of looking at it.
But has it been beaten back, if you will, effectively?
I want one thing I do want...
There's still so much of it.
There is, but I think one of the issues that brings together what difference does it make if women are in office? Mm-hmm. So one of the things, I created a group of women foreign ministers, and we would meet in New York regularly, and we'd talk about our lives, but we would always offer something, and we got together, 10 of us, that in fact said something had to be done about it internationally, and we lobbied in terms of, and I think it does make a difference if you have women in these particular positions, but it was a new crime, frankly. It was kind of, you would think it wasn't, and you asked about the United States. I think people were stunned to find out how bad things were in the United States, that we could talk about whatever foreign country, but we were not exactly at the top of the list.
And then Secretary Clinton, for whom you worked, she set up a global ambassadorship for women's issues. And has all that been rolled back under this administration?
I believe so. But, you know, I think that in many cases, a lot of our allies are keeping up the pace.
Yeah.
And I think there's just been a heightened awareness. You know, we're one of the few countries that hasn't had a woman take the office of president. We've had one that won the popular vote, but not take the office of president. And, you know, in many countries, it's not just the diplomats and the people in the government or the women that are members of parliament or in their Congress. When you have a woman that's the head of state, that changes things too. All of a sudden, you start to see things about child care and education and the things that are the underpinnings of democracy, of civil society, that give people a chance, that give people a sense that they can compete, really come to the fore. And, you know, I think that's why women make a difference.
May I just
we're about out of time. I want to get Ambassador
Yeah, I think that it's, first of all, let me just say Secretary Albright's group of women and foreign ministers continued through Condoleezza Rice as well. She had that. And I really do think it's an effective mechanism to bring attention to these types of issues. I think we need to go beyond where we are today. I think writing reports are fine, but they can become a bureaucratic process. Holding meetings brings visibility, but we really need to get the tools and the instruments to follow the money, to hold these people, you know, for criminal offenses. I mean, I think we see how we can do that when we did the war against terrorism.
That's right.
Right? We have those tools, so we can apply them to these traffickers because it really is.
Do you see that happening under the Trump administration?
Well, no, I don't see it happening under the Trump administration, but I think it's a disarray. The Trump administration has not quite found its place, right? So this issue is not going to be one of the higher ones. But I think if the more women, foreign ministers, presidents, diplomats, I think you'll get the attention that it's.
Yeah, just take 30 seconds.
We're out of time. I'm sorry. Behind the headlines, some experts say political opportunities globally for women are limited by violence they face in their own lives as well as by culture that teaches women not to aspire to political office. We spoke with the Director for Gender, Women, and Democracy at the National Democratic Institute about their efforts to empower women.
In some places, men in particular see this as a zero-sum game. Women up, men down. I'm losing. That's not the way it is. We focus on women's integration because we truly believe that a more inclusive, responsive political arena is better for everybody.
Sandra Pepera is Director of Gender, Women, and Democracy at the National Democratic Institute. She focuses on women's participation in politics internationally. Women make up 23% of female lawmakers globally, compared with 19% in the U.S. That, she says, is a historical high. But Pepera adds that doesn't mean there's a balance of power between women and men. The biggest factors mitigating against women's participation are violence and culture.
In some countries, we know women are not allowed to step outside the home without a male chaperone. In other countries, where, for example, the UK, United States, where you'd say that we have all the rights and the freedoms and the resources to step into politics, women's leadership can come under vicious attack online, in the media, and from other political opponents.
Male politicians are victims of politically motivated crimes as well. For example, earlier this year, Republican Representative Steve Scalise was shot at a congressional baseball practice. Pepera says as women become more politically engaged, attacks directed at them are growing and being used to suppress their participation.
In Uganda, we had a situation where the opposition party in 2016 went out to campaign and they were stopped by the police and a tussle broke out. The point at which the woman who was leading one of the parties was taken aside and stripped naked, that is an issue of a violence that is directly, specifically towards the woman, and it says, don't come out here. This is not the arena for you. You shouldn't be out here. which young Ugandan woman is going to join politics after that?
Pepera says 2016 was a particularly tragic year for politically active women. Women, like men, use the internet to organize, fundraise, and spread their messages. Pepera is concerned about the chilling impact of online harassment against young women. An International Parliamentary Union survey found 80% of female parliamentarians face threats online. This has a disproportionate impact on young women who are more likely to shun politics than young men.
Young women are 80% more likely not to even step up for any public leadership position when they see high-profile women being vilified in the press or online.
The National Democratic Institute has issued a global call to action to end violence against women in politics. It's called #NotTheCost.
Women themselves have not even understood that this is not the cost of being in politics. That's why we've coined the phrase that it's unacceptable to be preyed upon physically, sexually, psychologically.
So, Secretary Albright, do you see violence against women in politics on the rise or staying steady or going down at this point in time?
I'm chairman of the board of the National Democratic Institute, and 2 years ago I went to the United Nations to really push the Not the Cost and really make it clear that it was on the rise. And the bottom line is, I was just in Mexico, where more women have been elected, which is terrific, but so has violence against them. And so it's a double-edged sword in that particular way, and we have to be clear about the fact that we do want more women in office. And by the way, I was the first one to have a women's person, an ambassador at the State Department. Hillary just took it to a whole other level. But the reason, not just because I'm a feminist, because we know that societies are more stable when women are politically and economically empowered. And so we do want more women to run for office, and NDI does a lot to support that. But I was really troubled when I heard the more women, the more violence. And so we have to really push back on not the cost.
That's right.
And your thoughts about did you see that when you were?
Well, I ran for Congress and won 7 times. And I have to say that in my part of the East Bay of San Francisco, I didn't have a lot of that. But subsequently, social media became, I ran in 96, 7, so that was just before all of that started. But, you know, subsequently, you know, when I'm on Facebook or Twitter, I can see the terrible way that women are treated. And, you know, it's just, you know, I think a pervasive sense that they're attacked physically. It's almost never about their work product or their ability to compete. And for younger women,
is the internet fostering more violence?
I think it is. I think it is because of the anonymity, the sense of you know, you can say anything and not have to pay a price for it.
But you think about like Benazir Bhutto, whom I was lucky to interview in the Beijing in '95. She was killed. Yes. You know, and her father, I believe, before her had been prime minister, and he was assassinated.
That's right.
So is it more against women now, the violence?
But I think the violence is more of a chilling effect in women's ability to understand that they should be running. You know, women come to politics like they come to everything else. They come as a mother, a daughter, and a sister, and they come as a member of a community, and they have tremendous responsibilities every day, caring for other people. And if you are, you know, I think many of us feel like I can take that myself, but I don't want my daughter or my son or my husband or my mother or father subject to this kind of intimidation. So I think we do pause at times and think, and I think that, frankly, society has to make it very clear that we have to encourage women and that this kind of intimidation is wrong for a democracy.
About 30 seconds left.
I just wanted to say, because you've looked at what the current administration is doing, and relative to trafficking in persons, Ivanka Trump gave a formal speech. The president said he's going to do everything possible on that issue, and also on this issue of domestic violence against women. There has been regression, like in Afghanistan, which is tragic, but I would say that they have given some very clear statements of intent and also forming groups in order to implement and take action and support NGOs that are doing great work.
I think that the broader environment of hatred creates the specific attacks against women.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry, we're out of time.
Very much.
That's it for this edition. Please follow me on Twitter and visit our website, pbs.org/tothecontrary. And whether you agree or think to the contrary, see you next week.